Hello, everyone. Have you ever wondered, what if the characters from the hit anime and manga Bungou Stray Dogs were not dogs, but dinosaurs? Well, I have been thinking about it non-stop for several months, and I need to share my visionary thesis with the world. But before we get started, a couple disclaimers. I have not read the manga or watched the anime in a while, so mistakes are entirely possible. I'm also not an official paleontologist yet, just an amateur student dinosaur enthusiast. Also, there may be spoilers, so I wouldn't watch this if you plan to consume the anime or the manga in the future. And finally, I unfortunately could not think of corresponding dinosaurs for the entire cast, so I left a couple out. Maybe I'll make a part 2 sometime in the future. Without further ado, let's get into it. Atsushi would definitely be a T-Rex, because they are both very powerful, popular, and everyone wants one. Some folks may argue that they're a bit overrated, but I still maintain that they are top tier, 10 out of 10 organisms. And obviously, both Atsushi and the T-Rex are the protagonists of their respective pieces of media. The T-Rex was the protagonist and the best character of the entire Jurassic Park franchise, and my mind cannot be changed. Dazai would be an iguanodon because they are both perceived as peaceful to the uninitiated, so it's often a surprise that they are actually quite large and can easily fuck you up good if you mess with them. See those nasty thumb spikes on the iguanodon? Those are for stabbing. Actually, the iguanodon's entire hand is an all-purpose tool. They had a thumb spike for defense, 3 weight-bearing toes for walking, and an opposable pinky for grabbing and holding things. Dazai is similarly all-purpose, as he can simultaneously be an ultra-manipulative supervillain type and a pathetic wet cat of a man, whichever the situation calls for. Also, Dazai is one of the first characters introduced in BSD, and Iguanodon was one of the first dinosaurs discovered and described. They've both come quite a long way from their old selves as well. Not too sure of this one, but I'd say Kunikida matches the vibes of a Struthiomimus more than anything else. Probably because they both remind me of modern-day birds. Heck, Struthiomimus was named after its resemblance to an ostrich. Tell me you don't see the similarities. In addition, the Struthiomimus had bones that were quite stiff in order to keep itself balanced while running, much like Kunikida. And the species name, Altus, is Latin for lofty or noble, which brings to mind Kunikida's devotion to his ideals for life. And finally, I'm not sure how common this phenomena is, but I also often see depictions of ornithomimids in fantasy settings, including Struthiomimus, as having neat handwriting, so is it too much of a stretch to give one a trademark notebook? Yosuno's a Carcharodontosaurus because they were both hurt by a war. For Yosuno, I really hope I don't have to explain that being groomed into torturing soldiers to the point of literal insanity for everyone involved is bad for developing an impressionable young child, but Carcharodontosaurus is a bit more complicated. While it didn't actually serve in any World War II efforts, a partial skeleton that was initially thought to be Carcharodontosaurus, and was also the first postcranial material ascribed to it, was destroyed in an Allied bombing. Until 1995, the only material anyone had for the Carcharodontosaurus was the surviving internal cast of the partial skeleton, which threw a huge wrench into the studying of the genus. That's probably the reason why no one figured out the sample was from a completely different dinosaur until 2025. Both of them also share cool little head ornaments, and are pretty damn strong and aggressive, which makes them absolutely terrifying. Carcharodontosaurus shows some evidence of face biting, which is also very common in related dinosaurs, and were one of the largest theropods ever, with one study putting the lifting strength of an adult at nearly 1,000 pounds. And Yosuno has declared that everything is her strength and has no weaknesses whatsoever, but she is also extremely fond of scaring the shit out of all her patients. But that's nothing compared to how she treats her enemies, coming at them with her massive fucking meat cleaver, or on at least one occasion, a chainsaw. Scary. This one was pretty hard, but I think Rompo would be a Troodon. Troodons are a small, more bird-like species that were likely pretty intelligent, at least by dinosaur standards, just like Rompo. Not much is known about Troodons, we're just basing this off some established evolutionary trends. They also practice communal nesting, which is where several different Troodons lay their eggs in the same nest. This is quite similar to how Rompo grew up, without a biological family, but with Yosuno and the other young detectives. Also, Troodon was discovered quite early, and was one of the first dinosaurs described that was originally thought to be a lizard, then a megalosaurus, then a pachycephalosaurus. This genus is still under scrutiny today and may be reclassified again. Ranbotsu is the co-founder and first member of the Armed Detective Agency, but spent his earlier years bouncing around between many different schools and jobs and never staying long. The similarities are eerie, wasn't it? Kenji would definitely be an Ankylosaurus, because they are both basically living tanks. All that bony armor on the Ankylosaurus made them practically invulnerable, and generally a huge pain for anything to attack. Which is the same for Kenji. Part of his power is superhuman durability. He gets fucking impaled almost as often as Atsushi and can still beat the shit out of practically anyone. He's literally the Incredible Hulk. The only difference I can see is that Kenji hits people with whole-ass traffic signs rather than a bone-shattering tail club. In addition, there's some speculation that Ankylosaurus was adapted for earth-moving, maybe not burrowing, but perhaps digging for roots and tubers to eat. Kenji also engages in earth-moving behaviors, like that time he literally moved a mountain to protect his village. Also, with all that armor, Ankylosaurus did not have a lot of space in its skull for brains, which is why they are often known as the cows of the Cretaceous. And Kenji raises cows and loves cows, so I see no issue. Tanizaki here? I'm thinking he would be an Amargasaurus. Amargasaurus was a pretty small species of sauropod that's well known for the 2 rows of spikes down the back of their neck. No one's quite sure what they were for. Maybe they could stab in defense, rattle them to scare off predators, or there's a now growing speculation that they were covered in skin, making a cool sail. Whatever the case, they were likely used for display purposes. Tanazaki's ability, Light Snow, allows him to create illusions as a display, usually for battle, kinda like the Amargasaurus might have. They are both also on the smaller side, at least compared to the people around them. The main difference between these two is that while the Amargasaurus might have been able to stab their enemies, Tanizaki absolutely would. Remember when he very nearly succeeded in stabbing the fucking mafia boss to death? In addition, the Amargasaurus' spines or sail would have likely made their necks pretty inflexible, keeping their heads low. Similarly, Tanizaki seems to have trouble holding his head high, metaphorically, referring to his ability as ill-suited for battle and feels mediocre about himself at best. Regardless, I think they are both absolutely spectacular animals. I feel like Fukuzawa would be a Diplodocus, because they are both naturally solitary creatures. Don't come at me, it took a hot second before the kids grew on Fukuzawa. Also, neither of them have very many natural predators. They're too awesome. Honestly, most of my reasoning for this one is about vibes and that awe-inspiring aura of power. I'm sure I'll have better ideas later. Octogawa would be a Eutyrannus. Eutyrannus is a tyrannosauroid that's a bit older and smaller than the T-Rex, and far less loved, unfortunately. Just like Octogawa here, but I love them anyway. Other similarities between them are that they both have killer coats, just one is made of beautiful feathers and the other actually kills people with his coat. Higuchi would be a Pachycephalosaurus because just like the Pachycephalosaurus, she charges into battle head-on, guns blazing, and has quite the tough exterior, mowing down enemies with no hesitation. Similarly, Pachycephalosaurus has a whole ass 9 inches of bone on the top of its skull, making it ideal for charging at other dinosaurs, maybe even at other Pachycephalosauruses, and a broad, bulky body that made it able to take hits much easier. And unfortunately, we know practically nothing about either of their daily lives. Pachycephalosauruses aren't often fossilized because they lived in the extremely erosive highlands, with the exception of their very durable 9-inch skull domes. Higuchi, too, could live in the highlands for all we know, because we haven't really seen her at all outside of her mafia work. The only thing we know about her is that she lives with her younger sister. We also can speculate, from Kafka Asagiri's Twitter, that Higuchi has some kind of special ability, the name and nature of which is unknown. Like Higuchi, we are also only left to speculate on what Pachycephalosaurus used their head domes for, because further scrutiny has revealed that they likely didn't ram their heads together like previously thought. It's more likely that they butted each other in the sides. I'd say Kyoko would be a velociraptor because they're both pretty small. The velociraptor was only 40 pounds, and they both lived in darkness. We do know that the velociraptor was nocturnal due to the size of some of their preserved eye bones, while Kyoko was a notorious mafia assassin for years under the assumption that she was a flower that can only bloom in darkness. They are both also good with blades, Kyoko with her swords and knives, and Velociraptor with its scary sickle claw. In addition, they are both commonly thought of as monsters, Kyoko from her being dubbed the 35-count murderess from her mafia days, and Velociraptor from an unflattering depiction throughout the Jurassic Park franchise. But they're really not. Velociraptors were just sweet little dog-sized chickens with teeth and long tails. And Kyoka's a sad 14-year-old girl who's trying her very best to be good. And finally, Kyoka seems to like rabbits a lot, carrying her rabbit toy around all the time. And Velociraptor would love rabbits too if they lived in the late Cretaceous. They'd be the perfect size for them to hunt. Chuya would be a Triceratops because they are both extremely popular with the fans. And I feel very confident, after doing many surveys, that practically everyone knows what a Triceratops is, probably mostly due to Jurassic Park, which gives them lots and lots of well-deserved fans. And maybe I just don't get out enough, but I have not met a single BSD fan who does not love Chuya. I'm not saying I don't like him or anything, I love Chuya just as much as the next gay, but it's a bit surprising considering that he literally has something like 20 minutes of screen time in the whole 5 seasons so far. They both also have plenty of fancy ornamentation, and despite not being the tallest or the smartest around, both Chuya and Triceratops are 100% prepared to fight and kill some of the most dangerous creatures to ever live in order to protect their families, whether it be dragons, giant Cthulhu monsters, or T-Rexes. I'm thinking Fitzgerald would be a Stegosaurus, because first of all, they are very recognizable. Anyone with even a rudimentary understanding of dinosaurs can recognize a Stegosaurus. They're practically in every book, film, and museum related to dinosaurs. Similarly, the real Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald is a household name. Even my stupid ass was able to recognize the Great Gatsby guy when he showed up in the anime. In addition, both Fitzgerald and the Stegosaurus can be bought, and require vast amounts of money to do so. Fitzgerald is very rich and likes having money, typically only helps people that will benefit him and who he is convinced will win, which is why he stopped fighting the detectives and is now helping them. Similarly, the Stegosaurus fossil known as Apex was one of the most expensive fossils ever sold at a whopping $44.6 million in 2024. He now belongs to a rich private owner. In addition, they both could be described as great, because Fitzgerald's ability is literally called the Great Fitzgerald, and the Stegosaurus is only one of the hands-down best animals ever. And finally, they both evidently cared for their families. Stegosaurus because there are fossil trackways showing family units of juvenile and adult Stegosauruses traveling together, and Fitzgerald because he literally tried to rewrite reality to bring his daughter back and heal his wife. Mori would probably be an oviraptor because they are both slender in build and have gotten bad reputations over the stealing of children or eggs allegations. The main difference between them is that while Oviraptor had its name cleared for the most part, though there is still a bit of speculation that they may eat an egg if necessary, Mori is guilty as charged. He very much has groomed multiple children into doing dirty work for him. It's literally a documented fact. In addition, Mori has a habit of purposefully hiding his true personality in favor of acting like a normal middle-aged man, especially in public. This is not too dissimilar from the Oviraptor's original skull that has been crushed and badly distorted during the rigorous fossilization process. Lucy would definitely be an Appalachiosaurus because Lucy's last name is literally Montgomery, while Appalachiosaurus is named after Montgomery County, Alabama, close to where it was discovered. The only known specimen of the Appalachiosaurus is a juvenile, but most of its skeleton was remarkably complete, including the new bone growth on its tail that was indicative of healing from an injury. Lucy, too, is healing from her childhood injuries, both figuratively and literally, with the poker scar on her arm. Also, if you remember from the beginning, Atsushi is a T-Rex, a close relative of the Appalachiosaurus, and close friend of Lucy, because he was the first person to ever be nice to her, as far as I know. Due to the difficult life she had, Lucy is pretty closed off and has a hidden personality that she covers up by being mean to people. Similarly, the Appalachiosaurus was a highly derived animal, more so than almost all others in the Tyrannosaur family. And it has a 6-hole crest on its head, although it's a bit hard to see here. And finally, they were both from the east coast of North America. We haven't gotten confirmation on Lucy's home, but the real Lucy Maud Montgomery was from Prince Edward Island, Canada, so it's a common theory that Lucy is Elsa from around there. As the name implies, Appalachiosaurus is from the Appalachian region, and is, in fact, the most complete dinosaur from the North American East Coast, which is not a high bar or anything. There are barely any dinosaur fossils around there due to geological activities, but still. I'd say Koyo would be a Spinosaurus, because for starters, they are both very tall and narrow-shaped, as opposed to crocodilians that are more short, round, and barrel-shaped. And maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places, but I tend to see a lot of fan art associating Koyo with cranes, which are very, very cool. And if you look at Spinosaurus here, it most likely lived very similarly to a giant prehistoric crane, wading into the water and waiting for fish to get close before snatching them out and eating them. A proposed function of the Spinosaurus sail is creating shadows in the water to make fish think, hey, this is a good place to shelter, much like some modern wading birds like herons do with their wings. The weaponization of the darkness is similar to how Koyo thinks of Kyoka, and by extension herself, as flowers that can only bloom in darkness, which is why she's so cynical and shuns things like hope and love. She also has a lot of trouble accepting the fact that Kyoka or anyone else could change and thrive in the light despite of the past that she seems to be stuck in. Similarly, Spinosaurus was not done in by the asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous, and was likely brought down earlier, when climate change destroyed the river habitats and they were unable to adapt enough to survive. Fyodor would definitely be a Dilophosaurus, mainly because there's a wealth of information perpetuated about both of them, and almost all of it is faulty or just straight up wrong. While Fyodor leaks fake information about himself and his ability on purpose to kill people better, the Dilophosaurus was just unfortunately put into Jurassic Park with many embellishments, including a frill and tiny size, and now many people genuinely believe that. Half the paleo art I see of them features a frill and venom spitting, even though there is no evidence of either. Although it does look extremely cool, and I love Jurassic Park nostalgia as much as anyone. These common misconceptions would make both of them extremely difficult for most people to fight, although that's not a likely scenario for you or I to be in. Also, Fyodor's cello playing absolutely slaps, while the sound reconstructions of the Dilophosaurus sound extremely cool, much like a bird humming, at least in most of the studies I have followed. In addition, as far as we know, neither of them can spit venom, at least in the literal sense. They are both also shown as monsters in their respective pieces of media, although whether or not Fyodor is a monster is open to interpretation, I guess. But the Dilophosaurus was just a silly little girl. I mean, look at her! It's often easy to forget that dinosaurs were just animals, not spiteful, hungry monsters. However, they were both the apex predators, or close to it, of their environments. Fyodor was basically at the top of the food chain as far as we've seen in BSD, but that may change, as they are allergic to not adding new super predators every season to up the stakes. Nikolai would obviously be an Archaeopteryx because both of them are often compared to modern-day birds. Archaeopteryx because its extremely well-developed flight feathers and broad wings meant that it was most likely capable of flying or gliding, and Nikolai because his main motivation is wanting to be as free as a bird, and this bird you cannot change. They also both have very elaborate coats that are slightly asymmetrical, much like most modern birds. In addition, Nikolai seems to be almost conflicted on his actions, claiming that he does indeed feel guilty about torturing and killing tons of people. However, this guilt does not stand in the way of his sadism, and may even encourage his behaviors further because he wants to be free of everything holding him back. Similarly, the Archaeopteryx was a very complex animal compared to a lot of other dinosaurs, and had an unusually large brain. This is more evidence towards the fact that they could fly, because flying takes a lot of brain power. Archaeopteryx also had a very long, hooked, killing claw on its feet, similar to the velociraptor, likely for grabbing prey. Nikolai engages in a similar behavior, particularly when he captured Atsushi's leg and stabbed it many times before leaving it on the floor. Techo is definitely a Therizinosaurus, in part because they are both known for having extremely odd diets. Techo habitually combines unorthodox foods together and eats his hard-boiled eggs with the shells on. He's so me, for real. And the Therizinosaurs are the only known family of theropods to have converted back to herbivory, likely just eating leaves and foliage. They are also both equipped with sick-ass blades, Techo with his saber, and Therizinosaurus with his giant Freddy Krueger claws. But unlike Techo, Therizinosaurus just likely used its blades for grabbing leaves rather than attacking children. In addition, they are both pretty large and quite scary looking, but they seem to be the least dangerous and violent member of their respective peers. I know that's not saying very much at all, but, well, he may be a cop who tried to murder at least one innocent child, considering that half the other hunting dogs seem to really take pleasure out of tormenting anyone they can. I personally would much rather take my chances with Techo than any of the others. And considering Therizinosaurus was a large, slow plant eater, I would rather run into one of those than any other big theropod. like a Tyrannosaurus or a Tarbosaurus. And finally, Teruko's a Coelophysis because they are both tiny, nasty little buggers who are actually pretty old. Coelophysis was one of the earliest genuses of dinosaur, living over 200 million years ago in the Triassic. While Teruko's age is not confirmed, considering that she was a tween during the Great War, which is a minimum of 15 years ago, it can be inferred that she is probably in her late 20s to early 30s. That is ancient for a BSD character, whose life expectancies are just over 24 years old, if my math is correct. They are also both known for being skilled hunters who are even feared by their allies. Teruko can be a little intense at the best of times and behaves aggressively towards almost everyone, including her peers. Coelophyses were also not known for their flocking behavior and lived alone, though they were likely not cannibals, as has been previously thought. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. This took forever to make. If you think a part 2 is necessary, or if I'm wrong about something, feel free to fight about it in the comments. And thanks SlidesGo for letting me download this presentation template. Maybe some other time I'll show off the terrible doodles I made of the dinosaurs dressed as their respective characters.